Hi, my name is Jeremy Uy. I've been a game designer for almost a decade. And a lot of the games I made in the past 8 years or so are narrative-based games. I did not get there out of nowhere. I actually have other story experiences because I've been in theater for the past 10 years as well before that. So I've done theater, I've done a lot of different parts of theater. I've done production, I've done acting, I've done directing. There's a lot of different storytelling elements in theater as well. And I would say that foundationally, a lot of my storytelling experience didn't really come from games, but it's built on the foundation of theater. If you put it all together, it's like almost 18 years of storytelling. So hopefully this will give you a bit of confidence in terms of what I have to say. So what will I cover today? Okay, I'll just give you 4 major things to cover, okay? The first thing I'll tell is the 3 pillars of storytelling. In every story that you tell, if you break it down to its absolute fundamental levels, there's only 3 real pillars. I'm gonna give you 1 tip for each of these pillars. I'm gonna give you a little bonus tip to sort of figure out how to combine all these things together. And the last one is I'll touch on some tips on gameplay storytelling. So how do you transform these stories into games? This talk will mainly focus on storytelling. In the context of games, you just come in a little bit at the last, because I think once you nail your story down, I think it's a little bit easier to transition these concepts and these ideas into game. So what are the 3 pillars of storytelling? The first thing is setting. Second thing is plot. And the last one is characters. So what is setting? If you boil it down to its absolute core element, it's basically a time and a place. But what does time and place actually do? It is to give context to the story. Now, you might think, okay, time and place, it's pretty straightforward, but let's look at an example of a game, okay? The Last of Us. So what is the time and the place of this setting? Zombie apocalypse USA, 20 years in the future. As basic as it gets. The zombie apocalypse setting itself already gives you so much tools for storytelling, right? How does different parts of the US deal with it? You deal with the zombie apocalypse differently. How do people deal with the zombies itself? Cultures and societies itself. Spaces within the world. The main story starts in Boston, and it's a very authoritarian society, right? Because the first thing you see about this game is people immediately weeding out and executing those who they think are potentially sick, or those pose danger to their society. Because the 20 years allows you to build that history, build that culture, build that societal changes that you can adapt. Having said The Last of Us, I think it's very easy to look at AAA and just say, oh my God, this is AAA, this is a studio with hundreds and hundreds of people. These are writers with 20, 30 years of experience, working with other writers of 20 to 30 years of experience. How do you internalize setting? Okay, so for today, I want to keep things really, really, really simple. Will it be a good story? I doubt it, but will it be a better story? I can guarantee that. So setting, time and place, right? So how do we apply this? How do you make your setting better? Let's start with this. What is this place? Grocery store, supermarket. If your setting takes place in the grocery store, it's pretty mundane, right? There's, you can buy things, there's shopkeepers, there's other people buying other stuff. Nothing really going on, it's pretty mundane. How do you make a better setting than a grocery store? You don't really need to think about zombie apocalypse. You don't really need to think about a robbery or anything, nothing really extreme. What about a grocery store that's almost closing time? I make a small tweak to the setting. It's almost closing time. Immediately, I want you to think about what are the possibilities of setting your story in a mundane setting like a grocery store, but that's almost closing. People might be rushing for last minute purchases. Stock might be low, staff might be short. Just changing the time alone adds this additional element that you might not consider. Because a good setting helps advance the plot. So now let's look at plot. Again, you boil it down to its essentials. You boil it down to its core elements. A plot is basically a series of events on your narrative. A plot is like this. Something happens, and then something else happens, and then something else happens, and then something else happens, and then your story ends. This story, this is from God of War. You start with the funeral of Kratos' wife, and then you find out that, it's a wish for her ashes to be distributed across the 9 realms. They meet different characters, they figure out which actually is the highest point. There's some gameplay, there's some combat, there's some story elements, there's connection with the sun. At the end of the day, you get to do what you're set up to do, which is to spread the ashes. Again, AAA studio, there's so many things, multi-million dollar, animation team, multi-million dollar cast, how can you create a plot that is as interesting as the one that you see, in other AAA titles or any of that sense. I'm going to go back to the grocery store again. So now we have the grocery store. Why not add a plot? So a series of events, right? Okay, I have a setting. Now what can we do in a grocery store? You buy things to cook, to store, or whether or not mostly to cook, okay? All right, so let's add a very basic plot. Let's just say I want to make beef stew, and I want to go to the grocery store to get ingredients for getting beef stew. I go get the beef, I go get some merkwa, maybe get some stock, and then I pay and go home. This is my plot. My plot is pretty basic, pretty bare bones, not very interesting, right? It is a very easy trap to fall into. And what is that trap? That makes your story boring. Yes. There's no? Correct. There's no conflict. This story has nothing driving it forward. It's just, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then your story ends. And you will be surprised that because even though if you up the stakes of your story, like Kratos goes to fight this Yeti, and then he goes to meet Yoganman, the giant snake, and then he goes to do this, and then he goes to do that. Even if you escalate the setting or the characters, or the events as high as possible, people will walk out and feel like, actually, why am I here? What am I doing? What am I fighting for? That kind of thing. How do you make a plot better? How do you get conflict? What are the sort of checklists you can do to sort of instigate conflict in your story? You change the and then into a therefore or a but. There's a little quote there from, it's called The Writing Advice from Matt Stone and Trey Parker. Matt Stone and Trey Parker are the creators of South Park. If you go find this clip, they will express this term, change the and then into a therefore or but, because it facilitates conflict. Now, how would that look like? Okay, now I'm going to take the same story, the same setting. Remember, a good setting advances the plot, right? A good setting pushes the plot forward. The shop is closing, and let's bring that in a little bit more. So I plan to make beef stew tomorrow, so I went to the grocery store, but it's almost closing time. I started with the beef chunks, but it was already sold out. The only beef left was minced. Therefore, I decided to try and turn them into beef balls instead. Making beef balls sounds like a good idea, but I've never made them before. Therefore, I checked the recipe on my phone. Turns out that one of the ingredients I need is onions. Therefore, I need to make sure to pick up extra while getting the ingredients for the merkwa. I walked towards the section where they store the bouillon cubes, but something caught my eye. There is a sale of liquid stock due to the closing clearance. It is more expensive overall, but it's an offer I can't refuse. So I took it. I stopped at the counter to pay for the groceries, but I realized I went over budget due to the extra ingredients, and my payment app is low on credit. Therefore, I awkwardly tried to reload it and pay, holding up the counter, causing a build-up behind me. With everything done, I went home with all the ingredients I need. Again, not really high stakes, not really over the top or interesting, but it's a little bit better than the one before, just a little bit better, because the setting creates an environment where it sort of advances the plot. I want to make beef stew, I need the beef cubes, but because it's closing time, logically, it makes sense for beef cubes to run out. I want to get stock, but due to the closing, something is on sale. I'm constantly pushed to making different decisions, therefore buts. And you see I do it a lot. It might sound very repetitive, but even in the clip that you watch for Matt Stone and Trey Parker, they actually mentioned sometimes it's good to overstate this because it really, really helps you to really finally check whether your story is interesting or not. And don't be afraid to do this, because at the end of the day, you have to write this story in dialogue, in gameplay or whatever not, right? So don't be worried when you do it in this stage, when you're plotting out the story. Now, if you look at it, right, I'm just color coding all the things that determined by plot or setting, and how, where does it come in to sort of like push the story forward, add a little bit of conflict, add a little bit of tension, here and there. Again, very mundane, very, very basic, but it just makes it a little bit better. And I hope by contextualizing this in something mundane, you can apply this to your concepts and stories as well. Okay, a good plot has cause and effect. Something happens which causes something else to happen. Therefores and buts. Now, the last pillar is character. A character is, if you again look at the very basic term, very basic definition, a person or animal or being or even objects can be characters. What do you do normally when you make characters? You normally create a character sheet. A character sheet is basically a series of traits, habits, goals, conflicts, superpowers, weaknesses, ideologies, religion, and things like that, that tells you as much of the character as possible. There is no universally accepted character sheet, but a lot of the character sheets will answer the questions for your characters if they encounter different scenarios in different moments. This is a character sheet from JoJo Bizarre Adventure. There's a book called Theory of Manga, if I remember correctly. This sheet is from that book itself, and you can look at it online. It's pretty easy to find. But of course, in the context of JoJo Bizarre Adventure, they have superpowers, right? So maybe you don't really want to take that part if it doesn't apply to you. When you look at this, oh man, there's so many things to think about your characters, right? You know, JoJo Bizarre Adventure is like such a beloved franchise. You know, it's running for many years and things like that. Well, how are you going to apply? You know, how are you going to apply this into your story? How are you going to make it better? And you cannot avoid this. This is the one thing I would recommend you do for your characters, to create a character sheet for your characters. It doesn't have to be complex like this one. It doesn't have to be robust as this one, but you really, really, really need one. Why is that? Players tend to remember characters more than plot. Think about a game that you've played like recently, right? Or perhaps like a very famous video game, and you played through it before. And I want you to really stop and think, what is actually the plot? Do you remember the plot at all? Compared to what do you remember about the characters? And I want you to test this limit to the extreme as well. If you talk about a game that you played like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and you try to recall what do you remember about that game, most people will think about the characters. They cannot clearly visualize what the plot is. There's a talk in 2014 GDC called Death to the 3-Act Structure, towards a unique structure for narrative. There is a slide in there that references a research paper done by, there's a research done by Microsoft that proves this point. But if you want to learn more about that, I recommend you go to watch this talk. Characters is very, very, very important because people tend to remember characters more than plot. When you create characters, sometimes it's very easy to sort of like get into visualizing this character you want to do, but you don't really know this person. And if you don't know this person, your character sheet might tend to be a bit finicky because they don't really, perhaps their goals don't line up, perhaps their traits don't match well with one another, and sometimes it creates a very conflicting and very confusing character. So what do? You start with a character that you know very, very well. You just pick a few points from the character sheets that you can find online, or perhaps you can even use this JoJo one, or perhaps you build something for yourself, and try to map out this character. All right, Jeremy is a good problem solver. Jeremy maybe is a bit insecure. Jeremy likes taking care of his wife. Jeremy likes cooking. Jeremy dislikes inconveniencing others, producing low quality work. Jeremy tends to get lost in his thoughts, keeps his promises. After going through a character sheet, you have a sort of character. How do you make your characters better? If you look at this, right, it's like, this is just a series of traits, habits, and so on and so forth. Nothing remarkable, nothing interesting, or nothing nothing to shout home about. How can you improve your character is you want to give them very clear wants and very clear needs, so they can change or grow in your story. What I'm asking essentially for you to think about is, what is the arc of your character? They will go through their own journey into learning and discovery and conflict and self-expression and self-discovery and so on and so forth. Now, how do you give a want and a need? Let's look at the things that we talked about before. You have the grocery store, we have a stew. Okay, we have the stew plot, we have the grocery store setting, we have this character, Jeremy. Jeremy wants to make the best beef stew for his wife, but he needs to learn that sometimes his best efforts is the efforts that he put in. He has a want because he wants to make beef stew, and he has a need because he needs to learn that even doing your best is good enough doesn't mean that you're producing the best work. And if you look behind, they're all derived from this character sheet, right? Taking care of his wife, cooking, producing low quality work, keep his promises. These are all the points that you draw out from your character sheet that you then create an arc with. So now you have all the 3 pillars there already. You have your character, you have your setting, and you have your plot. Okay, I'm going to give you one more bonus tip for better storytelling, just to sort of like wrap everything together. In theater, one of the concepts that I've learned and sort of like drilled into me is this concept called Johaku. It's a Japanese term. It roughly translates to beginning, break, and rapid. It essentially means that all actions or efforts should begin slowly, speed up, and then end swiftly. If you think about all the good stories and the good, of all the processes of storytelling itself, there's a sense of like beginning and the middle and an end. In a 3-act structure, this is a very basic story structure that there is widely adapted in all media in that sense. There is, do you see this flow here? Beginning, rapid, break. It exists, right? And if you look at other interpretations of story structure, like the Dan Harmon story circle from Rick and Morty, it is a variation of that 3x structure, you know? You don't get the sense of pace here, but if you watch the episodes itself, you can get that sense of pacing. And if you really want to express this to more other concepts, think about songs. Songs have structure, right? They start with verses and then they end, they build into choruses. And usually the pacing picks up. Usually there is some sort of escalation and sort of like build up in that sense. Video games, right? There's gameplay loops. Gameplay loops are, you start slow and then you build up and then there's this sort of momentum that kind of builds up in that sense. A good story is well paced with actions and consequences. This constant flow of build up, they call it climax, build up, climax, and then an end. I do something happens, and then the result of what happens. A lot of art forms are fundamentally driven by this rhythmic flow and structure, and people tend to get more engaged if they get a sense of that. Even the way I'm telling you right now, even this slide, I'm breaking it down. I'm building up the parts, the different slides from different contexts in different contexts, right? It's well paced. So now we have character, we have plot, we have setting, we have pacing. Okay, so and then we have this premise, right? Jeremy wants to make the best BC for his wife, but he needs to learn sometimes his best is the efforts he put in. So just bear with me. I'm just going to show you how everything comes together, all right? So just bear with me for a while, okay? So how will the final story look like? It's nighttime. Jeremy's wife is homesick. She asks if she can cook some beef stew for her for the next day. He tells her that he will cook the best beef stew that he can make. He's cooked this before. He can cook it again, no problem. Therefore, he needs to head to the grocery store so he can make it the next day. But as soon as he arrives, he realized that the store is almost closing. At first, he went to the beef section for beef chunks, but it ran out. Again, remember the setting? That's the main ingredient, he thought. He still wants to fulfill his promise to make the best beef stew from the recipe he knows, but he needs to improvise. He noticed that the minced beef is available, therefore he grabbed it, thinking that he can make beef balls instead. I hope I can make this work. So if you look at the color codes, right, the buts and the therefores are all there. The yellows are the setting, right? It runs out. And the red are the characters. He wants to fulfill his promise. It derives from the character point. He wants to keep promises. He needs to improvise. He's a good problem solver. I hope I can make this work. He's insecure. All these things, all the character traits are coming through to this story, right? Next on his list is the ingredients for the merkwa, but he needs extra onions for the beef balls. He starts to pick up the onions, but he discovered the line to weigh them is really, really long due to the lack of staff. Therefore, he decides to avoid burdening the staff by buying the pre-packed onions and skipping the queue, even though they are more expensive. Again, the buts and the therefores, again, the lack of staff comes from the fact that the store is closing, and avoid burdening the staff, avoid burdening comes from the character traits. The bouillon cubes are just down the aisle, but there is a clearance sale for liquid stock. There is one left on the top shelf. It could add flavor to the stew, so he went for it. But just as he takes it, an old lady gestures at him. Turns out she wanted it but couldn't reach it. Do I really need it? He thought. I can substitute. Therefore, not wanting to upset the lady, he gave it to her. Instead, got some Worcestershire sauce for the additional flavor. Finally, at the cashier, after a long line, it's finally his turn to pay, but due to the extra ingredients, again, consequences, right? You can just say that, he ran out of money, and then he ran out of money. It's not as interesting as, because I need to improvise, therefore I buy more ingredients, but buying more ingredients costs more money, therefore I ran out of money. It's a bit more interesting. Due to the extra ingredients, he doesn't have enough money for his payment, and therefore the line is building up. Therefore, dropping the sauce, he would have just enough to pay for everything else. Should he risk causing a line to build up by reloading the app? But he needs to understand that even if he can't make the best beef stew for his wife, she will appreciate his efforts. Therefore, he lets go of the sauce, pays for the improvised ingredients, and goes home. All right? This is the final story. Is it very high stake? Is it very super interesting? It's pretty mundane if you ask me. In fact, this can be a story that a person tells you when you're meeting for lunch or you just chit-chatting by the office or whatnot, right? But it turns and then I do this and then I do that into something happens and something happens, and then it becomes a more interesting story. I'm not telling you I'm not teaching you to tell you the best ever story. I'm just telling you how to make better stories. And these are the ways to make it better. And if you look at the concept of the whole thing, these are all the color codes, these are all the points that your story are driven by the specific points. Each section has its own rhythm and flow because in each point, there is usually some sort of action and there's some sort of reaction and there's some sort of consequence that comes out of it. The whole entire story is an arc itself, and each segments are broken down into its own mini arc itself. Each section creates its own rhythm, this rhythm builds onto another rhythm, and if you look at the whole picture, this whole rhythm is repeated in one gigantic form. And the last thing I want to touch about is game mechanics as story. Let's look at it like, oh, what if I turn this story into a game? What would happen, right? Like, there's a lot of elements in this story already. There's, making decisions, the fact that it is closing time, there's a shopping list. If you find all these elements in your story, then you can maybe think about how you want to express these story elements in terms of gameplay mechanics. You're making choices, right? So dialogue choices. Store is closing, maybe you need to get these ingredients before a timer. You have a checklist, you have an ingredients. You're buying beef stew, and then you're buying beef stock, and then you're getting the mercor, and then you're getting some, maybe there's a shopping list. But you're also improvising. And that anxiety of seeing, like, I did not finish my goal, that creates some sort of level of uncertainty and anxiety within the play themselves, through the characters, through the story itself. And then maybe there's like a morale meter or something at the bottom, to be like, oh my God, do I want to inconvenience people? Maybe there's a morale meter. Again, please don't make a game out of this. I think it's going to be terrible, but I'm just giving examples in terms of how do you break down stories into different mechanics. The setting of the story creates genre mechanics. The verbs, what the players are doing creates, player actions, and the character expressions usually are told by UI. Again, these are not like universal. This is just like starting off points, just kicking off points. All right. The better your mechanics line up with your story, the better your game is, okay? Good stories have active characters that constantly pushes forward, driven to achieve something but held back by personal flaws, placed in a time and place that challenges them. I'm putting stories in the context of the characters because you experience a story through a character. And by having characters as your main focus, that's why I say character is very important. You need the character sheet, right? Plot and setting and all these things, I think they're pretty flexible. But if you can get your characters right, I feel that people will feel overall a little bit more engaged. I guess that's it. Thank you very much. It's not a very long talk, but thank you. If you enjoy what you see, you can connect with me. If you want me to give more talks in different events, you can talk to me as well. I'm also giving free game design coaching. Okay, TNC applies. If you go to the link, there's a link there. I'm all ears if you want to listen to me talk more, if you want to listen to more advices, contact me.